Mind if I kick you out of that
Oh.
seat?
I was wondering if they were sitting there. Sorry, they were already doing their camera, so. Not me, better.
You want to just refresh it. There.
Yeah. It's only because of the network.
Yeah, I didn't know if you were, I saw they were doing their videos, I didn't know if you were actually still doing it.
Now you do a switch over to me.
Invite you from here again.
Well, let me log out and go into Sapien Tech, just to make sure that we're on the same page. Sapien Tech.
How's it going?
Good. How are you?
Pretty good.
Good. Is it both you presenting tonight
Yes.
at the same time?
No, me for 10, 15 minutes, and then.
Okay.
Did you send another invite or?
Hold on. I'm trying to send an email. It should be on the way. Mac Mail and Screwgle.
Well, that's the original. Does it matter?
Sure.
Oops. Well, let's try it.
There it came in right at the end.
Okay.
Actually.
Well, that's the original. Does it matter?
Can you click on the,
Over here?
yeah.
Hmm?
Do that guy right there. I want to watch, I want to participate. So good. Click on right there. You do that. Oh, click add circle.
Does it matter?
It doesn't matter. Can you scroll down a bit? I wonder if. I forgot how Alan did that one last time around. It worked out fine. Alright, I'm just gonna kill it. Let's do this. What you got there, Chief?
Well, we have to go through the video splitter from one of your computers, and then when you switch to the other computer, you'll have to unplug it and go to that one because of the live stream.
I'm assuming we can get
So you're
further.
doing off the computer now? So are
Yeah.
you capturing it?
Yes, it captures your screen and there's a video camera.
Okay. How good is it? Is it better than?
Well, I don't know what the quality is that gets saved.
Okay, because I'm not interested in even plugging into that stream. I'd rather, this works, so I'd rather not muck around, because that's a lot of shucking and jiving for, I don't know if it's going to work or not, Makes sense.
Well, it's for the people that are in LA
Okay,
that are watching.
okay.
That's the reason we do this, is for the people that can't make the meeting, essentially. It's not for archival purposes or anything, because we really don't, at this point, archive them.
I'm broadcasting again.
Mm-hmm. So, can you invite to participate?
That's what I'm trying to do here. Oh, monkey. This should be it. Invite people.
Do Sapien Tech.
Okay, so we're going to bridge to you, and you're taking the video input.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, so which one are you guys doing now? One?
Okay.
I'm doing one, yeah.
All right. So that's yours.
So do I join Hangout? What do I do?
Yes, join Hangout.
Just a second. Put this power in, and we'll come back.
Sure. Trust me. I will do no harm.
I see my
That looks
camera.
promising. That looks very promising.
Yeah. Well, that's definitely me.
That's definitely it. So
if I want to broadcast, do I hit join here?
yeah. Alright, so now I got that. There you are.
Feedback loop.
Sorry for being.
That's all right.
And so
So
how
what
does
I
this
can
broadcast
do?
my screen?
So okay, I'm just gonna.
should unmute that and share my screen.
All right, I see you. Okay, now it went back to your
Desktop.
Go ahead and hit that again.
Okay. Okay. Then we should be good.
I believe so.
All right. Hi, how's everybody doing? Everybody getting enough pizza to eat? All right, good. Well, my name is Ferdinand Rios. I'm the CEO of Sapien Technologies, and I'm going to talk a little bit today about building PowerShell GUI tools. Before I go into that in a lot of detail, for those of you that are not familiar with Sapien, how many people here know our products, have used our products? A few people on that end, nobody on this end. Okay. Our premier product is PowerShell Studio, which is a integrated development environment for PowerShell. Not only can you create typical PowerShell scripts, but you could also create PowerShell modules, and on top of that, you can also create GUI interfaces for your PowerShell scripts, which is part of what we're going to cover today. PrimalScript is our kind of granddaddy product. It's an integrated scripting environment for over 50-something languages. It's been around since about 1998. If there's a scripting language that doesn't support, I'll be very surprised. So it's constantly being updated. So iPowerShell Pro is our remote PowerShell reference tool that runs on the iPhone and the iPad. So you can actually create remote sessions into your PowerShell web access servers, as well as get detailed information about PowerShell commandlets, aliases, about help, providers, etc., etc. Those are our three primary PowerShell-related tools. Then we have a number of different tools. Version recall. How many people here? Well, first question. How many people here consider themselves to be developers? Okay. So does that mean everybody else here considers themselves to be IT people? Yes? Yeah? Okay. How many of you guys use version control?
Yeah, I do.
1, 2. Okay. Kind of. All right. The reasons I hear most people don't use version control is, oh, it's too hard to set up, it's a pain in the butt to use, you have to be constantly checking files in, checking files out, so on and so forth. Version recall is our new version control software, which basically eliminates all that. You install it, you tell it, I want you to manage this particular folder, and whatever you save into that folder gets automatically versioned for you. At any time, you can just go back, right-click on the file, select the version that you want from the past, and bring that version back. It's very, very simple and easy to use. It literally takes a couple of minutes to set up. No checking files in, no checking files out. It's what I call version recall, version control for the rest of us. So give it a shot, take a look at it. By the way, all of our products have 45-day free trials. You go up to our website, www.sapien.com, and you can download 45-day trials of all of our products. We also have a traditional version control program called ChangeView. We have an XML tool, a SQL tool, and a product which is called the Sapien Software Suite, which is all of our products put together for some ridiculously low price. It's usually less than the price of PowerShell Studio and PrimalScript combined, and you can get all of our products. Okay, so I want to kind of lay out a couple of terms here that I want to clarify: tool versus a script. So what is, if I'm just going to say I'm going to create a script? Typically, when I talk about a script, I'm talking about something that you're going to create for your use to do something. Something is usually to automate tasks are usually quick and dirty. They don't necessarily have all the best checking in them because, well, you're in control of the thing, right? And you know, well, I know that I shouldn't use that as input because if I do, that's going to crash. But I never use that as input anyway, so that doesn't matter. The principal thing is that when I say a script, I'm talking about something that's under your control at all times. All right? Now we're going to compare that to what I mean by a tool. And a tool is typically something that you create that you're going to hand over to somebody else to use. So what does that insinuate? That insinuates that you are not around to babysit the execution of that tool. So if you're not around, then what are the requirements? The requirements are that that tool is structured and is resilient to errors. And it also helps if the interface is professional and it is robust. Okay? So this is kind of where we differentiate a script versus a tool. Basically, a tool is a step below application development. All right. So a tool can be a script. It could, a command line tool, which you can hand out to somebody to use, or it could be a GUI tool. Question is, well, why would you choose to create a GUI tool over a command line tool? Well, first of all, why do we use GUI interfaces on our computers rather than command line interfaces? Typically, it's because it's easier to use for a naive user in particular. But you can take your GUI tools and you can package them so that everything that you need to create to execute a specific set of tasks is all packaged together. They're easy to use typically. A well-designed GUI tool, a person doesn't have to guess what kind of input they need to put in there because everything is prompted for them on the screen. And hopefully they're easy to distribute. Typically with a GUI tool, at least the way we produce our GUI tools, you can package and deploy them very easily to your end users. GUI tool can also, if it's well done, can be more secure than a naked script. And I'll show you what I mean by that when we get into the development here. All right. So how do you make GUI tools? One, hand-code it using PowerShell and .NET. So that's perfectly easy to, well, not easy, but let's see if I can switch tabs here. Hold on a second. Let's, I have here.
Ferdinand, just real quick,
Yeah.
if you're not going to cover it, does anybody have any use cases for building out the GUI? Do you have end user support that you don't want to train them, which is rather have a UI instead of trying to? Is that the typical use case?
Yeah, typically what we see people doing is that, let's say there's let's say you're working at a help desk, and there's you get a lot of calls about, well, I can't seem to kill this application or something along those lines. So you, rather than just send them a script that kills off some application that they have to type in the name for, you could create a GUI tool that goes, looks to see what processes are running, and then allows the user to select a process and kill it or something along with that. Okay. But going back in creating a GUI tool by hand, what you'll see is, and this is actually PowerShell script here to create a GUI tool by hand, and this is the tool that we're going to create here in this session. But you can see that if I drag this all the way down to the bottom of the screen, this is over 200 lines of code or script, and all it does is put a couple of elements on the screen. It puts a window on the screen and some buttons. That's it. That doesn't even include the functionality for those things to actually work. So, creating it by hand could be pretty time-consuming. So rather than creating it by hand, you could use an advanced design tool like PowerShell Studio, which is what I'm going to demonstrate to you guys today. So what is PowerShell Studio? PowerShell Studio is a complete integrated development environment for the development of PowerShell scripts and tools. And when I mean complete, I mean that it will, you can create any kind of script, whether it be a GUI script or a standard PowerShell script. It's a powerful editor. It has command line completion. It's got syntax coloring. It's got syntax checking. It's got IntelliSense. It's got everything that you need to do your work in PowerShell. Now, we've added a number of features to the new version of PowerShell Studio, the 2014 version, which is out already. Some of these things are 32-bit and 64-bit executable. So if depending on whether you're working on a 32-bit or 64-bit platform, either 32-bit or 64-bit version of the PowerShell Studio. We have some interesting functionality where you can verify a script against a server. So for instance, you're writing a script, and you need to know whether or not that script is going to execute properly on some server. We have technology that goes out and queries a server, finds out all the modules that are on there, what command lists they support, et cetera, creates a report for you that tells you whether or not the script that you created can execute properly on that server. If you then kind of tie that in with what's that stuff that they were talking about here last time? DSC. DSC. If you tie that into something like DSC, you can then have DSC install all the components that you need in order to execute that script. We have now this year an MSI builder, so that we have always supported the creation of executables from PowerShell scripts. Now you can take that one step further and create an MSI, which you can then deploy, and that will install like a regular application on the desktop. Okay. And there are a number of other interesting new functionalities that were added to the product this year. So, without much further ado, I'm going to switch over to actually running PowerShell here, PowerShell Studio. Let's get that as full screen as we can. How's that look up there? Okay. Excuse me? You want the font up higher? How's that? Okay. See how easy that was? So, right there. That's all you need. Okay. So this is PowerShell Studio. I like to show the startup page for one reason, and that is because every time I talk to people that use the product, the first thing they say is, oh, that's the first thing I get rid of, is the startup page. Well, you shouldn't get rid of the startup page because there's a lot of interesting information here. At least check it when you start the program. Okay. First of all, in the newsfeed section, it's a listing of all of our current blog articles. And it will also tell you whether or not a new version has been released. There's some interesting articles there on PowerShell and GUI creation and all sorts of interesting stuff. So always check there. That information is quite useful. Also, there's an area where you can just very quickly click on a file that you used recently and get back to where you were working before. All right, I'm going to kind of go through a little bit of round robin and show you what we do here. We have a number of panels. So the center panel is where you're going to be working, and your scripts are going to show up. But off to the left, we have a toolbox. This is going to contain all of the components that all the controls that you can add to your GUI. We have a project manager. So if you're creating a very sophisticated application with multiple files, multiple scripts, what's the word now? Modules, things of that nature. You can put them all together into a project and manage your project there. We have an object browser that has all of your PowerShell aliases, your commandlets, everything is here, and you can easily just click and double click on something there, and it'll stick it into your script. We've got a .NET browser built in. So again, you can just go through all the .NET classes and find the objects that you need. We've got a WMI browser. So if you're doing WMI work through PowerShell, all of those WMI objects are here as well. You've got a file browser if you need to do any kind of file maintenance. Excuse me, that's a database browser. You can create connections to your databases, have all those connections stored. You can actually look at the structure of the database. So if inside PowerShell you're doing any kind of database work, you can very easily drag fields from the database browser into your script. And then we have a file browser for file manipulation. Let's see where we are. Down at the bottom, we have console. We have a 64-bit and a 32-bit PowerShell console. They're independent of each other, and when you switch between them, they retain their original context. So you don't have to worry about, you can try something out in the 64-bit console, switch to a 32-bit console, try it out, and then go back to the 64-bit console, and it's still exactly the same way as you left it. We have 32-bit and 64-bit debugger. Finding in files, help, this is actually, I'll show you how that operates later, and then the standard PowerShell output window. Okay. On the right-hand side over here, we have what are called snippets, and we'll see how snippets work. Snippets are pre-saved pieces of code, so if you do things repetitive, there's certain things that you do repetitively, like if-then loops, things of that nature. You can actually just go over to snippets, double-click on it, and the code will get inserted for you. They're smart snippets in that if you select something in your code, and then let's say you say, oh, that needs to go inside an if-then loop, you can select it and go over to the snippets, double-click on the appropriate construct, and it will encircle the object, the script that you had selected. And of course, you can always add your own snippets as well, simply by selecting script and saying create a snippet from it. Properties, we'll see how that operates. Basically, these are going to be the properties that are associated with specific objects that you create. And functions is going to be a listing of all the functions within the scripts that you have defined. All right, so let's go through and start creating something. And here's the scenario that this is going to be the world's simplest PowerShell tool, okay? This basically because there are some time constraints here, but the scenario that I use is you want to create it, and I mentioned it earlier. You want to create a tool that maybe somebody can execute, and it'll tell them what all the running processes are, and put it nicely inside of a window for you, okay? And you can envision that you might want to add a button to that will then take those results and email them off to you, so that the end user, so that you can see from the end user's perspective what processes we're running on their system. So I'm just going to come on over to File, and I'm going to create New. You see that we have a number of options. PowerShell script, which is a standard, regular PowerShell script, a form, a new project. You can create modules, and you can also create modules from functions. This is actually kind of cool in that, let's say you had 5 different files, and each of those files had 2 or 3 different SQL functions. And you wanted to bring them all together into one module. You can say, create a module from files, select the files that you want. It will then list all of the functions that are in all of those files, and you can go through and select the functions that you want, and it will extract them and put them all together into one module. It's a very slick little tool. I'm going to start with a new form, and I'm going to create an empty form. You see that there are a number of different styles of forms that you can create. I'm just going to create a new empty form. And there's the basics of our form, and I can grab this, and we're in a designer mode here. Notice that there are 2 tabs. There's a designer tab, and there's a script tab. The designer tab is where you're going to be laying out your form, and the script tab is all the functionality behind each of those objects that you load. So you'll notice just by creating a form, I have 3 functions already listed: application load, on application exit, and form load. These are called event handlers. An event handler is what gets executed when certain events happen on the system or for that application. Okay? So I'm going to go back to my designer, And I'm going to now lay out my design using a couple of tools here. So I'm going to go over to my toolbox. I'm actually going to pin that open so I can get to it. And let's see, I'm going to come down here to text box, and I'm going to drag that over. Notice that there's some guides. Hopefully you can see it up there that pop up in the corner. It kind of helps you to lay things out in a visually appealing fashion. And I'm going to stretch that out to the other side. It's going to snap to that guide there. And that's going to be our output screen. So I'm going to come on over here to properties, and I'm going to pin that to the screen. And I'm going to sort these properties alphabetically because I like using them in that fashion. Notice that I have two handles on this text box, so I can make it wider and narrower, but I can't make it taller or shorter. And that's because there's a property called multi-line, which right now is set to false. If I double-click on that, it sets it to true. I have a couple of more handles. I can stretch that out as tall as I want. All right. So now I'm going to add a couple of buttons. The first button I'm just going to drop here in the lower left-hand corner. The second button I'm just going to drag it out to the lower right-hand corner. And this first button I'm going to call that Get Process. Anytime anybody has any questions, please feel free to stop me, okay? The second button I'm going to call that Close or Exit or whatever. Okay, so ostensibly, when this application runs, user presses the Get Process button, it goes out, gets all the processes that are running, dumps them into the text box, and then they can hit the Close button when they're done. We can add a third button here. Let's put this right in the middle over here, and I'm going to call that Email. And that will be the button that the user presses to email the results to me. Okay. So now, if I go to run this now, so I'm just going to tap on the whole Home tab, and I'm going to hit Run. The first time you run it, it's going to ask you for a name. So I'm going to stick this into my demo folder, and I'm just going to call this Demo. All right. So there's our form. Okay, so far I haven't written any code, right? Here's an actual form. I can resize it. I can minimize it. I can maximize it. Looks like blah when I max. A couple of things. $, right, which in PowerShell is the name of starts a variable, right? Button Get Process. Notice that when I created that button and I changed the name, it automatically creates a event handler with the name of that particular item. So what happens now if I decide I'm going to change the name of my button to something else. Well, PowerShell Studio is smart enough that it will go through all of your script and it will update all the references to that particular object, whether it be a variable, whether it be an event handler, it updates the references to that object with the new name. So you don't have to worry about going back and like, oh, why doesn't that work anymore? Well, because the name of that variable is no longer real, it doesn't exist anymore, or that event handler is not connected to something. We always go through and fix up the code for you. So I'm going to open here my help window very quickly so that you can see what's going to happen. So if I come on over here and I start typing get dash, right away it goes through and starts listing all of the PowerShell commandlets that start with get. And if I hit P, R, O, whoops, that's 0, O, get process, all I have to do is hit tab for completion. It tells you there all of the parameters that can be used with get process. And as soon as I hit space, notice that in the bottom window, it automatically found get process help inside PowerShell itself and puts that help on the screen for you. So any PowerShell commandlet that you have installed that has a help file, that help will automatically show up here. So you can scroll through this help, look at examples, etc., and look at whatever the related links are. So all that help is right there at your fingertips. So if I come back over here, so now what do I want to do with this get process? Well, I don't want to just run it, because if I run it, what's it going to do? It's going to get all the processes and do what? Nothing. It doesn't know what to do with it. So what I'm going to do is I am actually going to I'm going to take the text box, and anything that you place on the screen, any control that you create on the screen, we automatically in the background create a variable for that control with that control's name. So I have a text box in there, and we can see that the text box itself, the name of it is textbox1. Drop down to name. Where is that? Yeah, what's up?
We are seeing your face on the desktop.
Oh.
Hop over real quick.
Sure.
So you're in the session.
Yeah, hold on a second. I gotta come over here, and now, does it matter when I switch over? It's
Okay, I see you there. I'll just.
okay.
Thanks.
All right. Sorry about that. So we automatically create a variable for that object. So our text box object, if I look at the name of that object, where are we? Title. Make sure that's selected. Where is it now? No, I can't find it. There it is, name, textbox1. Okay, so if I come back to my script and I start $, it gives me a listing of all the variables that are currently in scope. Start typing text, and there it is, textbox1. I can just hit tab. As soon as I hit the dot, it gives me all the properties and the methods that are associated with that object. So I know that the object, the property that I want is the text. So I type textbox1.text, get process, excuse me, where's my pipe character? Pipe through, outstring. Okay, so there's our PowerShell. We're going to call get process. We're going to take the results, type it out to outstring, and the results of that are going to be put into the text box, the text property of the text box.
For example, you're displaying output that require that it's always outstring as opposed to sending an object.
If you're displaying it on the form it's probably going to have to be as a string because the forms don't understand objects. You can do everything that you want with the objects before you display it as a string. Okay. That's not entirely true. It depends on the control. So, for instance, we have a grid control where you can output array objects and data, data from databases and so on and so forth, and automatically pipe them into that grid object, and it populates it.
Like Xbox or Stable.
Yeah, those things recognize strings only. So yes, you would have to do that. So if I come back now to my designer. Well, let's add a couple other things. I'm gonna set up the close, and basically all I'm gonna do is I'm gonna say, well, before I do that, I want to show you how snippets work. If I come on over here to snippets, I select demo. I have here a predefined snippet called close form. If I double click on that, it automatically inserts the code that I've already predefined called close form, and that is, it gives me the form1. Close parentheses. So, if I run this now, well, that was pretty fast. Didn't even hit get process. Hold on a second. Where did I put that get process? It was on form load. That's why. See, that was just too smart of me. How about if I take this and stick it here? All right. So now we have an empty form. The user can come on over, hit get process. It gets all the processes. It doesn't look very nice. Our form still doesn't size or anything, but we can hit close, and the form closes. So we're getting there. So just a few more changes. In order for everything to resize properly on a form, you can select the object, and you can select what's called the anchor points. And this object I'm going to anchor to all four sides, meaning that when the surrounding container, in this case the form, changes size, the text box is always going to maintain the same distance relative to the edges. So this distance, the bottom distance, and the right and left distance. So I'm going to do similar with the buttons. I'm going to come over to the button, and I'm going to set their anchor points. And this one I want to anchor to the bottom left, so that when the form changes, the button always stays in the bottom left. This one here is going to be anchored to the bottom right. And this center one is going to be anchored to the left, bottom, and right. Okay. Now a couple of other things. The form itself, I don't really like the name of the form. The user should. This is going to look like an application to the user, so I'm going to change that to call that get process. And when the user runs it, I want them to see a nice looking icon. So I'm going to select an icon, and there's an icon that we can select. So now I'm going to run that. There's our application. Notice that we have a new icon on the screen on the bottom. We have our get process. I hit that. I can stretch. Whoops, look at that. Email button is growing. It probably only should have been anchored to the bottom, not to the sides, so we'll fix that. But the text is still kind of all mushed up. So let's come back to our form. Let's fix that email button anchoring. So we're only going to anchor that to the bottom. And let's fix the problem with our script box here, our text box. And the problem is that, well, first of all, there are no scroll bars. So we're going to add some scroll bars. So we're going to have horizontal and vertical scroll bars. And we're going to we want the text to spread out nice and evenly. Right now, it's hitting. Well, it's not obeying tab rules because this is a proportionally spaced font, so we'll set it for a monospaced font. Let's see, come over here to the font, and I know that we have a nice font called Consolas that is a monospaced font, or Courier, either one. And I would just hit execute again.
Man, this is Microsoft. Fun people are across the street.
Yeah, okay. So here's get process. You see now everything is nice inside, nicely tabbed, and I have scroll bars, so I can go up and down and scroll and so on and so forth. And ostensibly I can add some script behind email so that it would automatically take those contents and email it out to me. We wrote exactly 2 lines of code to create this. Okay, and it took us, 10 minutes? But that's not all. So you create this. What do you have now? You have 2 files. You have a PFF file, which is a form file, and you have a PS1 file, which has all the script behind it. Well, you don't want to give that to anybody that way, for the same reason that you don't really ever want to give somebody a naked PS1 file. Why is that? Because typically, if you give it to somebody who's a little bit more knowledgeable than a naive user, they're going to start messing with your script, and they're going to maybe mess it up, and the next thing you know is you've got a support call that you have to go and fix that script now because they've played with it and they've changed a bunch of stuff. So what we allow you to do, and again, what I'm going to show you now works for both GUI scripts and command line scripts. All right, so it's not just for GUI. And this is what we call here our deploy mechanisms. Okay. So I'm going to very quickly see this section that says Packager. I'm going to very quickly click on Settings, and I'm going to take a look at, here's my application. It's called Demo, so it fills in a bunch of stuff for me. I can create a manifest for it if I want. I can even create alternate credentials if I need the script to execute, let's say with elevated privileges and alternate credentials. I can include those here. I can sign the script just by selecting a certificate. I can even select execution restrictions. I can say, this script is only going to execute on Windows 8.1 machines or on Windows Server 2012 or something along those lines. We can add versioning information, so every time you update your tool here, it'll update the version information. And you can also add pre- and post-build commands if there are things that you wanted to do in particular before it builds and after it builds. So let me just make sure that I have everything here. This is going to be a Windows form, 64-bit form. Make sure everything is in OK. That all looks good. And now I'm just going to come over to Build. And there is our exe right there, Demo EXE. I'm going to double-click it. And you'll see that, boom, that's exactly the way it should operate. So now we have a single file that we can distribute out to end users. So a couple of things that you have to recognize about this. This is not a true executable file. We're not compiling PowerShell, okay? Which means that whatever you need, whatever calls that you made inside that script to outside modules, you have to have those modules present on the system. Okay. There's always a bad idea, even though, let me back up here. When this executable executes, right? It unpacks itself in memory. There is no hard disk footprint of the script once it's created, once it's put into the excuse me. There's no hard disk footprint of an unencrypted script. Right? It all executes in memory. Keeping that in mind, it's never a good idea to put credentials to very sensitive data inside a script because And I see somebody shaking their head, yeah, well, sometimes it might be. Here's the deal. It's more secure than a naked script. But if you have somebody sitting at your machine with a debugger and watching this thing execute and looking at the memory, they could, in essence, extract the credentials from there. But if you have somebody sitting on a machine inside your network with the debugger running, you probably have a bigger security problem than someone just looking at those credentials. So, you know, of course, you have to weigh what is and what isn't a good idea. Yes?
You could use credentials to prompt the user.
Absolutely.
Coding it.
Absolutely. Yeah. So there's our executable. So now, I don't want to just give that executable to somebody just like that. I want to distribute it through my software distribution system, whatever I have in-house. So we've added the ability to create an installer. So I'm going to come on over to the installer section here, and I'm going to just take a look at the properties here. This is a Windows application that I'm going to be executing, and I'm going to create a 64-bit installer because this is a 64-bit system. If you have any other files, resources, data files, anything else that you want to install with this executable, you can add those files here on this screen. So whether they be images or DSNs or actual data, whatever, you can add anything that you want, and this will put it all together into an executable, into an installer. You can also sign the installer as well. Yep, absolutely. I'm going to hit build. It goes off, does its thing, churn, churn, churn. As soon as it's done, it will let us know that it's finished building and pop us up onto the screen. So there's our MSI. If I double click that MSI, what does it do? It starts installing. So it's doing its thing. Installing, installing, installing. Progress, done. Okay. So what did that do? If I come down to my start button, all programs, there's our demo, and there's our executable. Click on it, execute, same old stuff. Whoops, this is the wrong one, but you get the idea. It's the same, and hit exit, and away you go. So now you have the full process of being able to not only create a script, and remember, not just GUI, standard PowerShell scripts, modules, etc. Process of creating them, test and debug, create an executable out of them, and then distribute it as a MSI. So you have a complete cradle-to-grave solution for distribution of your script tools. Yep.
A really good use case. I don't know if my company uses the WPF app, or probably know they could use your product to build this up. But in my start run programs, I've got a self-service print server. Much the same way. So in that same way, you can query what the print server is in your location. Let users identify which one they want using the select checkbox. Run through some of that self-service type thing, letting them decide. So now, having to get someone to sit over there, which is your closest printer. So I think it's something great.
Yeah, we just did in-house. Actually, the senior engineer on PowerShell Studio, our web developer, excuse me, not our web developer, but one of our techs had to prepare all these flash drives that we're handing out at that we handed out at the PowerShell Summit. And so, we got one of these big USB blocks, and we could put in 25 flash keys in at the same time. Well, it's kind of a pain in the butt to go through and copy files to each one of those individually. And then you've got the issue of, well, what drive letters do you have? 25 flash drives, what drive letters? And obviously, you're going to run out of drive letters at some point, right? So David, who's the lead engineer on PowerShell Studio, created a PowerShell script with a little GUI interface that goes out, queries everything, tells, she can just check the boxes for the drives that she wants and stuff, copied onto, and just selected the files that she wanted, pressed a button, boom, and it wrote through all the drives. It actually created multiple writing queues and wrote all this stuff almost simultaneously. And then she just pulled out the flash drives, put in 25 more, pressed the button, boom, away it goes. So it was a great tool. It took him maybe, I don't know, half hour to write, the tool or something, and then just give it to her as an executable and run it, and it just did the job. It was a great tool. All right, how are we doing on time? Okay, so let's see if there's anything else here that I want to demonstrate.
So question.
Yeah.
I'm watching this and it looks like a little Visual Studio.
Yep.
Slightly
Mm-hmm.
different.
Yeah, very much like. It was designed to. It's designed to look like and work like Visual Studio. But
Visual Studio, why do I want to use this?
well, if you are a PowerShell person, you don't know C#, you don't know VB, you don't know C++, what's your option? There is none, right? I mean, because you really can't do PowerShell work like this in Visual Studio. Okay, a lot of IT people don't like the idea of installing Visual Studio because it's a huge install, and it installs a number of different components on their systems. This is a much smaller, much cleaner install. This is dedicated specifically to PowerShell language, so we don't have to worry about bloating the application by being able to support multiple languages. So, I mean, and then we do things that PowerShell Studio just doesn't do, like the stuff that I just showed you, creating the executable out of the script and deployment, et cetera, et cetera. Now, there are a number of other features that we have also that are very PowerShell related. This will tie into the version recall very easily. So you can, if you have version recall, you can then use this to just save something through version recall. Let's see what other features up here that I can. Okay, so everything that you've seen, I said you create two files. You create this form file and create this PS1 file. You could, if you wanted to, just have everything in one PowerShell file. So there's an export command here, export to file, and that takes the form information and the script information and munges it all together into a PowerShell script. It's going to be a long script. Probably what we just showed, what we just did right now, is probably going to be over 5,000 lines. And the reason, because it's going to have a lot of binary data in there. And that binary data is basically the state of the form and all the properties that you set and all that sort of stuff on the form. So, but it will run as a script. You can execute it, and it will actually create a window and do all that stuff. All that information is still there. You cannot, once you've exported it, you can't take that export and reverse it back into PowerShell Studio. And that's a one-way trip. I mean, you still have the original script and the original form in PowerShell Studio, but if you go and make changes in that PS1 file that you exported, we can't bring that back in. So that's a one-way trip. Let's see what else we have here. You can hook into a number of different tools. You can see different tools. Well, there's our version recall right there. We can tap into saving files. Some of the nice things about this, because you have a PowerShell console built in, two PowerShell consoles built in, you can write a line of script in the editor and say, well, I want to test to see what I'm going to get back from that. You can just copy that, paste it into the PowerShell console, execute it, look at the results. Oh, okay, that's what I expected it to do. So let's say you have a very sophisticated pipeline. Then you can, or you can do it the other way around. You can write it in the console, test it, and then just copy it and paste it into your script. Another feature that we have that nobody else, something that Visual Studio doesn't do for C++, which would be great. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, okay. We have this. We talked about snippets, right? And snippets are saved pieces of script that you can just double-click and bring into your application, into your code right away. We also have the same thing, or something, a similar idea on the visual side what we call control sets. So for instance, let's say that when you're creating apps for people, when you're creating tools for people, you you have a pattern of a text box that has a button, and when you press that button, it allows them to select a file in the file browser. You know, they click on the file and it puts the name of the file into the text box. Let's say that's a pattern that you use repetitively on tools that you create. You can actually lay that out, write all of the code behind it, and then select those objects and save that as a control set. And so now you never ever have to write that script again. You can just drag control set from the control set dialog and drop it onto your form, and all the controls and the script behind those controls will get placed in there for you.
What's the portability of that functionality? Is it bound to my IDE, or is that something I could redistribute to other members?
Oh, the control sets? Well, it's a PowerShell Studio thing. So, yeah, I mean, it's bound to PowerShell Studio. It's the forms that you create in PowerShell Studio. What was your question?
You can share that amongst multiple people.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Other people have PowerShell Studio, you can share that. Yeah.
So my question was, I'm building this interface, and I go through the process. Let's say one of my folks actually is on server 4. There is no GUI that's going to present support on execution. So a way to default back to doing it.
You know, I assume that within the script itself, you can probably test for that.
So I would have to test since they is
Yeah.
actually server 4 don't present.
Yes, because there's an application load method that gets executed before anything else gets executed, before the form gets loaded or anything else. So on the application load, you can probably test, and then you can branch out from there. Yeah.
Not fall back.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So you could have both personalities within one thing. Yeah. Question over here? Yes.
So you could build yourself a little library, basically.
Of the control sets?
So that the 10 other people can use
Absolutely.
control sets. The other part you
The
mentioned
snippets?
about having files that have to be there to be run, so does that mean the client user has to have all the files that you're...
Well, for instance, let's say that your tool that you created talks to Exchange Server commandlets, right? That won't run on a system that doesn't have the Exchange Server commandlets. Okay.
Could you do implicit remoting to get those commandments?
That's a good question. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that.
So how does it do that? You know, you got all these libraries, you just put that in the code, say import.
Well, here's what we do to make the coding itself easier. The PowerShell Studio, you can tell it to go and query a server and find out all the commandlets, all the modules that are on that server, and we build a cache of all that. Okay, so you can have multiple caches across all different servers. And then you tell it that you're going to script against a particular cache. And when you start typing a commandlet that it recognizes, then it's properly syntax colored in the editor, and all the the parameters for that particular commandlet will show up, et cetera, et cetera. Now, when you execute it, this is the workflow we suggest, is that you then run our server query tool that runs against the server and does the same thing. It looks at, but what it does is it builds a report for you, and it will tell you, yes, you have everything necessary to execute this script on that server, or no, these are the components that are missing. That's basically it. Anybody else? Okay. So I think that that's pretty much done on the demo side. So let's switch back here very quickly. Okay, so basically what we're trying to do with PowerShell Studio is to give you a complete cradle-to-grave PowerShell development solution. Okay, you write your scripts or your GUI scripts. You can test and debug, create the XE with the script packager, and then deploy with the MSI builder. So everything that you need right there to come out with a final product at the end. And that's all I've got for today. If you guys have any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them. And there's some contact information. That's our website, the store, and our forums, our support forums, et cetera, et cetera. Any other questions? Yes?
No, this looks like a great tool. My colleague used was it Primal Forms Community Edition, I think, since last year. Is that still available, or is that?
That is in the process of being updated, changed, something along those lines. It's right now it is not available because the code on that is so old that we want to update it and bring it into line, and it might come back as something slightly different.
Right.
So, yes.
Well, we're not like a project that's pretty good, but how does it stack up against the other guys, the other guy?
What other guy?
The other Power GUI Pro.
It's a totally different creature. I mean, they do different things, right? I mean, Power GUI Pro is more about being an editor and creating what is it that they call the modules, or I mean, you can't create GUI interfaces, right? The Power Packs, right? You can't create GUI interfaces. I mean, these two products can coexist. And here's the thing that I like to say is that when you go home and you look at your toolbox, right? You don't just have a hammer in your toolbox, right? You have a number of different tools, and depending on the sophistication of those tools, that's going to allow you to do bigger and better things. If you've got a whole bunch of power tools at home, you can build furniture. If all you have is a hammer and a saw, you might be able to build furniture, but it's not necessarily going to be the best furniture around. Okay, so these tools coexist. The ISE, PowerShell Studio, Power GUI Pro, all of these tools can coexist because they all do different things. And there is some overlap. Obviously, they all have an editor built in. Some editors are better than others. That's a personal personal thing. Yes.
If you're brand new to this product, what are the very recent sophistication of the product?
On our blog, we have dozens of articles about how to use different controls. There's a manual on how to use a product that's built into the product. There are forums that are all about GUI development that you can go up and ask questions and get questions answered. Plus our forums, we typically answer questions on our forums, within a couple of hours of them being posted. So there's a lot of good support out there. Other questions?
Ferdinand,
Yeah.
I had one. Is there any effort from you guys on possibly doing some YouTube videos?
There is actually, Jason Helmick has a YouTube video on using PowerShell Studio, and we're hoping to convince him if he gets some more bandwidth to do a series for us as well.
I think that'd be beneficial. When I try to get into it, because okay, where do I start?
Yeah.
I might be totally lazy and might have it in the documentation, but I'm a visual guy.
I totally understand that. Yeah, the visual, the videos actually his video has actually gotten quite a number of hits, and so we're pretty excited by the possibility of doing some more of those. Anything else? All right. Well, thank you for your time, and let me know if you have any other questions. Thank you.